first, I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your family, Naisha.
Yeah, I'm Naisha. I am 34, or sorry, 35 now. I have two children who are on the spectrum. Um, they are 9 and 7, and we are from East Preston, Nova Scotia.
Lovely. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your experience when you first heard about autism, your oldest
hmm
child, and those pieces.
Yeah. Um, so I knew about autism um, because I had a family member who had autism growing up. He was nonverbal and very much kept to himself. Um, so growing up, I was exposed to it. Um, and then when my son was diagnosed in 2019, I was somewhat shocked because um, he never missed a milestone. He walked when he was supposed to. He talked when he was supposed to. But as he got a little older, there were some traits that were happening that kind of pointed us into the direction of autism, such as his lack of communication with other kids. He very much side played. He didn't play with other children. And the obsessions of things. He is really, and he still is really into Ghostbusters and anything from the 80s, really. And like when he was younger, I just figured it was just a kid who liked their superheroes or a kid that just liked, same thing as Paw Patrol or whatever the case may be. But it just became an obsession where that's where he would only talk about these things. And if it wasn't regards to Ghostbusters, he didn't want to have a conversation with you. So that was kind of an indicator for me. And my son's aunt actually suggested that these are traits of autism that I might want to go through and start the process of getting him tested. And then we started that process. That took a few years because um, the first doctor, his family doctor, um, didn't really see autism. He kind of was like, no, there's nothing wrong with him. He's meeting every milestone. He's fine. And I really had to go in and actually have another appointment with him just to say, hey, are you sure? And he finally sent me off to a referral for another pediatrician, and that's when I was able to start the process of getting him tested because there were some quirks there. And when we got the diagnosis of my son, it was very difficult for me, just because I was kind of in denial with it a little bit. Again, because the traits that I was used to with autism were more on the other end of things, where a person needed support all the time and, you know, bigger challenges than what my son was dealing with. And when I went through that process of hearing, he is on the spectrum, it was very hard because I had all these dreams and aspirations for my son, and I was more so thinking of the worst, that I had, you know, to basically live forever so that I can care for him because nobody's going to care for him like I can. And it really was a difficult time because I felt that I was beside myself in a lot of it. And, you know, I'm from a Black community, so it is very difficult to talk about these things openly with others because generally we don't talk about mental health the way that we should. Um, and it's not that the community didn't support my son because, They do, they still do. But there were some things like that, as being a member of a Black community, there were some things that were just disconnected, that I found with community members. Like, if a child doesn't say hi to their elders, they were kind of like disciplined, or, labeled as like that child has no manners. And it was just, my son had autism and he didn't want to. He was in his own little world. So I have to educate people as we go, especially in regards to, church settings. If it gets noisy, we find a quiet space, and things of that nature. So, um, we definitely have adjustments that we've made that seem to be working for us, but I found that I had to really fight for, or advocate for my son in a lot of settings that, were everyday settings for him. Um, and yeah, it was definitely challenging in the beginning. Again, too, acceptance within my family was hard, because, even though we accept it for what it was, we would, we would never, um, be upset that he had autism. But my family had a hard time processing that he had it, because he didn't show the typical traits as what you would see on TV or whatever the case may be. And it was more so that we had to put our pride aside and get the proper, help for my son, the proper interventions for my son, so that he could, you know, be successful in his life on his own. Ultimately, that was my goal. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing about your experience and your son, and also how that impact of your community has also had had an impact on you and your son as well, and being from the Black community. I wonder if you can share a little bit about going in for the diagnosis itself in the clinic, and whether that's your son or your daughter, like what that experience was like as a parent.
Yeah. So I'll start with my son. So for that one, I was there with his dad. They basically did their assessments. I was in one room answering questions with a psychiatrist, and then my son was in another room with his dad, and they were more so doing like, play therapy. And I would answer questions. I would look through a glass, window, and watching my son play, and going through, all the questions that they've asked. Does he play with kids? Does he have this? Does that third? And it was difficult for me, because the reality was setting in that, you know he most likely is on the spectrum. And I just remember looking at him, and him not being able to comprehend what they were trying to get him to do. I remember it was puzzle pieces. He couldn't comprehend putting the two pieces together. And for me, that was something that I said, okay, you know what, now you have to put your pride aside, as much as this is a difficult process. And I knew deep down inside, once I got the diagnosis, that my life as a parent was going to be different from everybody else's, out of my friend group who, their kids are not on the spectrum. So I had to really like push through, and, really put my pride aside to get the testing done, to get a proper diagnosis, so that I can lay the proper foundation for my son. And it was hard in the beginning, because I had so many people tell me that he didn't need it, that he didn't look autistic, that he's perfectly fine. He just needs a minute to warm up to other kids. And I found that if I would have kept listening to them, we would be in a situation where he wouldn't have the support that he needs today, right? So, in the diagnosis room, there was a lot of emotion going on for myself. And, they were great. They were very knowledgeable. They did give us the diagnosis right then and there after they did their research. I think it was a couple hours that it took for the whole process. And then once we actually got the diagnosis, they diagnosed him right there. Um, it was a little bit of grief that I was dealing with. Um, it was a little bit of relief because I had the diagnosis now. And then I went through the process of blaming myself because I said, like, is it my genes? Is it my genetics? Did I do something? Did I not take enough vitamins? Did I not do this, that, and the third? Where did this come from? Like, so you kind of go through these waves of emotions and you feel like you're beside yourself most of the time when you go through this. And so it's very important to, understand that just because your child has this diagnosis, this doesn't mean that it's over for them, that they can't live a normal life, that they can't, be successful human beings, because they can. And it just starts with having the proper foundation for them. And I really had to, like, put my pride aside, put my feelings aside, and really focus in on my child.
Yeah. Yeah, in order to get the resources, right? And so even though that was a really hard process and a lot of people might have been steering you in another way, you did that and got through that. So I wonder too, like in terms of any tools or actions that you might have taken or steps to take that you may have taken following the diagnosis to cope. Like you talked a little bit about your grief and guilt and things like that. And what did you do? Like what are those things that you may have found helpful in those times?
Well, to be honest with you, I didn't have the tools to actually process this. I didn't have a support group to go to. Again, being on the outskirts of the city, a lot of the stuff I didn't have access to at that time, to go all the way over to Halifax to sit in a group of people that didn't look like me, didn't, come from the same community as me, didn't understand my upbringing or my son's upbringing. So it was very challenging. And honestly, I just had to bite the bullet and self heal on my own and go through the journey on my own. And it was very therapeutic. It really humbled me. Not that, it was a problem, but like I just felt that I couldn't openly talk about this with people, you know what I mean? What I was going through. And it took a few years for me to kind of get over it, kind of get through that guilt, through that, you know, hopelessness that you feel sometimes, because with autism, things constantly change. Like therapy might work for a few months and then the child regresses, and then you have to find something else that will help the child. So there was a lot of things that I had to go through. But honestly, it was just my self journey, and I I had to put it in my faith. I turned to my church. I prayed about it. I never prayed for the autism to be fixed. That wasn't the thing here, but it was just more so a spirit thing for me, just to kind of like get through it and find comfort in something that I could turn to somebody or to something, just so that I can get through it. Because the stress of being an autism parent is, I don't think people really fully understand that when you do get a diagnosis, whether your child is on one end of the spectrum or the other, the stress that you occur just for, going to a birthday party, just for little things like that, that people who don't have to deal with it on an everyday basis, they don't see that. They don't see that side. And I feel it's very important for parents to have wellness checks, especially when they're going through this, whether that's talk to a friend or talk to your child's therapist, just to kind of bounce some ideas and like to say like, is this normal for me to feel this way? Because I didn't feel normal. I felt like I was being selfish for feeling these feelings, but it was just a process of healing, really, you know?
Yeah. You're such a wonderful parent, and it's so amazing to hear you say that you couldn't talk about these things, and here you are today sharing your story, and that's awesome. So you've really
Yeah.
it's been a big journey. And you talked a little
Yeah.
bit just now about some of the strategies and having therapies and things like that. Like, can you talk about those strategies that you find helpful in supporting your children?
Yeah, therapy has definitely helped. Occupational therapy, and therapy in general to talk about our feelings. With my daughter, she suffers from extreme anxiety, which is one of the traits for autism in little girls. So, we go through therapy just to talk out our feelings and to express how we feel, and you know, in hopes that that kind of gives her the tools that she needs to kind of, you know, um, deal with any meltdowns that she has or to self-regulate, really.
Great. And in terms of support, like what would you think would be really important to include in preschool autism services in Nova Scotia for families like yours?
I think it's really important to offer an open communication with parents, because there are some parents who might think that something's going on, but they don't know, right? They don't know the full ins and outs of autism. I think that it's important to create safe spaces for these parents, because it takes a lot for a parent to go through these processes. Some parents are like, absolutely, I'm going to go through this and get my child diagnosed. Some parents will be on the fence about it. Like, do I really need to go through this? Do my kids really need to have labels in school? Um, you know, um, so having an open communication with parents just to say, hey, it's not the end of the world if they do have it. We want to support them, but we can't do it until we have a diagnosis. I think is really important, and just to kind of give as much information as you possibly can to parents. I found that with my kids well, my son didn't have the 4 Plus program. He was just a little bit, it was a year behind, but um, I wish that my daycare would have given me more information about my son's behavior um, when I would ask for it. So I would pick him up and I would say, how's his day? And they'd say, oh yeah, no, he's great. But they never would tell me that he wasn't playing with kids, or that he didn't want to finger paint. He had issues with sensory things, or um, you know, things that would have been helpful with identifying autism, but I wasn't seeing it because at home he only had his sister and himself that are young children in my house. So I never really got a chance to see him experience what he was like in his classroom settings. And I feel that if I would have known sooner that he wasn't playing with kids or he wasn't doing this, that, and the third, that I would have started my process with getting him diagnosed a lot sooner, so that he could have had support like EIBI and things of that nature. He missed those early interventions because the waiting list was so long for autism. And by the time he got the diagnosis, he was 6. So he missed out on that. So I kind of wish that, I know it's a difficult conversation for a teacher to have with the parents or whatnot, but that open communication to say, hey, we can't diagnose, but we're noticing some traits that you may want to just bring to the table to your doctor or whatnot, that would have been extremely helpful for me.
So important to get that information and communication. Yeah, that's really helpful suggestion. Thank you, Naisha.
Yeah.
And maybe one more question.
Yeah.
What advice might you share with other families that are experiencing, parenting and autism and um, in Nova Scotia?
Yeah. Um, you're gonna have your good days, you're gonna have your bad days, but every day is a blessing. Like, your child is healthy, they're happy, you know. It's it's not always going to be rainbows and butterflies and all that jazz. So you have to make sure that your mental health is good so that your kids' mental health can be good. And no matter what, you have to advocate for your kids. You have to advocate for your children, because once they start school, once things get start rolling with that, they might have labels put onto them. And you know your child best. So if you feel like your child is more than capable of handling schoolwork or whatever the case may be, social aspects of things, keep pushing for them, because at the end of the day, you want to have a solid foundation for your children so that when you are gone, you will know that they will be okay, to handle themselves. And autism is not a death sentence. I feel like when parents sometimes when they hear that their child is autistic, they're automatically thinking the worst, and it really isn't. It's okay to have feelings that you go through the grief, you go through the sadness, you go through the frustration. That is all normal in this whole process. It's normal for a parent whose child doesn't have autism, and it's normal for a parent who is dealing with an autistic child. But just keep showing up for your children. Have patience. Patience is absolute key in all of this. Like I said, there's going to be really hard days, there's going to be really great days. But just having patience with your child and supporting them the best way that you can. And if you don't know something, ask, because you're going to be surrounded by staff that know autism in and out. You're going to have a specialist, you're going to have a doctor, whatnot. If you feel like there's something that you want to correct or that you want to work on with your child, ask. And if they don't know the answers, they will find it for you. And do your research as best as you can, because you know you are going to be the only person that knows your child the best out of everybody. So just keep pushing and keep going.
Oh, that's such lovely advice. Thank you so much, Naisha. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you taking your time, sharing a little bit about your family with us and your
Yeah.
process of going through and those things that you find helpful. And thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem.